The alarm did not sound like a warning. It sounded like the whole station had taken a breath and forgotten how to let it out. I was 3 steps into the east corridor when the deck beneath me turned to lead. My boots, which a second ago weighed nothing at all, suddenly felt like they were nailed to the floor. My shoulders dropped, my spine compressed. The air itself seemed to push down on me from every direction, and for one confused second I thought the station was falling. It was not falling. The gravity generators had spiked. I checked the wrist display strapped to my forearm. The number glowed red, 5.2 times standard gravity. Not a glitch, not a flicker, a full sustained multiplier, climbing across an entire deck of the station, and it was still rising. Around me, the corridor had turned into a scene of pure chaos. A tall, feather-crested Ithran technician named Velen Thax had gone down first. He folded at the knees like his legs had simply stopped existing, and he hit the floor with a strangled cry, his wings pinned flat and useless beneath him. 2 Doran crew members, usually quick and light on their long insect-like limbs, were flattened against the wall, their breathing tubes flaring open and closed in short, panicked bursts. Somewhere further down the hall, glass shattered as a service cart tipped and crashed, spilling tools across the deck plating. I heard someone gasp my name. Ethan. I turned. Olivia Grant, one of the 2 other humans stationed on this ring, was gripping a support beam with both hands, teeth gritted, sweat already beading on her forehead. She was not down. Humans do not go down that easily, but even she looked like she was carrying a second person on her back. "Comms dead in this section," she said through her teeth. "Central doesn't know yet. Someone has to reach the control node." I did a quick, useless calculation in my head. The control node was 4 corridors away, past the collapsed cart, past 2 floors of alien crew who could barely breathe under this weight, and the elevators had already locked down as a safety measure, because nobody trusts an elevator car in 5 times gravity. "I've got it," I said. Olivia's eyes went wide, not with hope, but with something closer to disbelief. "Ethan, it's 5G. You can't just walk that." Didn't say I was going to walk. I bent my knees, dropped my center low the way I used to for long runs back on Earth, back when gravity was something you complained about instead of something that could crush you, and I pushed off. The first stride felt like wading through wet concrete. My thighs burned instantly. My chest felt like a strap had been cinched around it. But the human body is a strange and stubborn machine, built over millions of years by ancestors who ran things down until the things fell over from exhaustion. We were built to move through pain, not around it. So I ran. It was not fast, it was not graceful, but it was forward motion, one heavy foot after another, arms pumping to keep my balance, breath coming out in hard, controlled bursts through my nose, the way a person breathes when they refuse to panic. I passed a Doran crew member curled against the wall, his 4 eyes tracking me with something like horror. I passed a maintenance drone that had toppled sideways, its rotor still spinning uselessly against the floor. I passed Velen Thax, still down, his feathered head lifting just enough to watch me go by, his mouth opening in a sound that in his language meant something close to impossible. The corridor bent left. My knees screamed. I let my arms swing harder, using the momentum to carry my weight forward instead of straight down, the same trick sprinters use when the track feels too heavy and their legs feel too slow. Sweat ran freely down my back now, but sweat is not a weakness. Sweat is one of the reasons humans became the endurance animal of our home planet. We do not overheat the way most creatures do. We just keep going. The control room door was sealed, its manual override panel glowing amber. Under 5G, even lifting my arm to reach the panel took real effort, like trying to raise a bag of sand. I forced my hand up, slammed my palm against the release, and the door groaned open on hinges that were clearly not designed for this kind of load. Inside, 2 technicians were slumped over their consoles, not unconscious but pinned, arms too heavy to lift, faces pale with strain. One of them, a small silver-skinned Sonari engineer named Doran Kess, managed to turn his head toward me. "The regulator," he gasped. "Feed line 3. It is drawing power instead of releasing it. We cannot reach the manual valve." I looked where he pointed. The valve was set into the far wall, at chest height, behind a narrow support column. Under normal gravity, it would have taken 3 steps to reach. Under 5 times gravity, with my legs already burning from the run, it might as well have been on the other side of the station. I went anyway. Every step across that room felt like lifting a person on my back and asking my legs to still walk in a straight line. My vision narrowed slightly at the edges, the way it does when your body starts rationing blood to keep your brain working instead of your muscles. I reached the valve, closed both hands around the release wheel, and turned. It did not move. I planted my feet as wide as I could manage, dropped my hips, and turned again, throwing my whole body weight into it the way you would fight a rusted bolt that has not moved in years. Something deep in the mechanism groaned, resisted, and then gave way all at once. The wheel spun freely. Somewhere behind the wall, a pressure released with a long mechanical sigh. The number on my wrist display began to fall. 5.2, 4.8, 4.1. The weight pressing down on my chest eased, slowly, like a hand finally letting go of my shoulder. By the time the reading crossed back below 2 times gravity, my legs were shaking and my lungs were working like bellows, but I was still standing. Doran Kess stared up at me from his console, his silver skin flushed a deeper shade, his breathing slowly returning to normal. "You ran," he said, as if the words themselves did not make sense in his mouth. "You ran through that." "Wasn't exactly a jog," I admitted, still catching my breath. "But yeah." He did not answer right away. He just kept staring, the way you might stare at something that had just quietly rewritten a rule you were sure could never be broken. Gravity dropped back to standard a few minutes later, once the secondary regulators finished stabilizing the feed. Crew members across the deck slowly pushed themselves upright, groaning, checking limbs, helping each other to their feet. Velen Thax was helped up by 2 colleagues, his wings twitching in what I would later learn was a mixture of relief and lingering nerves. I expected gratitude. I expected, at most, a tired thank you and a request to file an incident report. What I did not expect was the look on Velen Thax's face as he watched me walk past him toward the medical bay for a routine check. It was not gratitude. It was something closer to fear, the kind of fear a person gets when they witness something that breaks their understanding of how the universe is supposed to work. I did not think much of it at the time. I was tired, my legs ached, and all I wanted was a shower and 8 hours of sleep. I did not know that somewhere on that deck, while I was catching my breath in the corridor, Velen Thax had already opened a formal incident terminal and begun typing. I did not know that by the next station cycle, my name would be attached to an official complaint, and I certainly did not know that the complaint would not be about the malfunction, or the danger, or the damage to feed line 3. It would be about me. 2 days later, I was called into an administrative office I had never even known existed, on a deck I rarely visited, to answer questions about something I still, at that point, did not understand was considered a problem at all. I walked in still thinking I was there to discuss the broken regulator. I was wrong. The moment the door closed behind me, I understood that whatever this meeting was about, it had nothing to do with feed line 3, and everything to do with the way my legs had moved beneath me while everyone else on that deck had gone down. Administrator Fen Ada was waiting behind a wide, dark desk, her 4 long fingers steepled together, her pale eyes fixed directly on me with an expression I could not quite place. Not anger, not warmth. Something closer to careful, deliberate curiosity, the kind a person wears when they are about to ask a question they have been building toward for a long time. "Ethan Cole," she said, her voice smooth and formal. "Please, sit. We have a great deal to discuss." I sat, still holding on to the assumption that this was routine. It was not routine, and the moment she opened the file in front of her, I realized that whatever was coming next was going to change how every non-human on this station looked at me from that day forward. Administrator Fen Ada turned the file toward me, though I could not read the script scrolling across its surface. She did not need me to read it. She had already decided to explain it herself, slowly, the way someone explains a rule they expect you to argue against. "A formal complaint has been submitted against you," she said. "Filed by Velen Thax, Technical Officer, 2nd Class. The complaint cites what he describes as, and I am reading this directly, unnatural physical behavior inconsistent with recognized biological limits, performed in a manner he considers distressing to witness and potentially damaging to crew morale." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "He is referring," she said, "to the incident 2 days ago, the gravity malfunction on Deck 7. He's filing a complaint because I fixed the regulator?" "He is filing a complaint," Fen Ada corrected, "because you ran, at full speed, through 5 times standard gravity, reached a control room that 2 trained engineers could not cross under their own power, manually forced open a mechanical valve that required, according to our engineering database, roughly 4 times the torque a Doran or Ithran physiology could reasonably generate under that gravitational load, and then walked to medical bay as though nothing unusual had occurred." She said all of this without a trace of humor, which somehow made it stranger. "That's it?" I asked. "That's the complaint?" "That is the complaint." I sat back in the chair, genuinely unsure whether to laugh or apologize. "With respect, Administrator, I thought I was in trouble for being late to my shift that day. I didn't think anyone was upset that I helped." "He is not upset that you helped," she said. "He is upset that what you did should not have been possible, and yet it happened directly in front of him, without warning, without explanation, and without any acknowledgement from you that anything unusual had taken place at all. From his perspective, and I want you to understand this seriously, Officer Cole, watching a member of a partner species perform what appeared to be an impossible physical act, calmly, without visible distress, is not a small thing. It raises questions about what else your species might be capable of that has not yet been documented." I opened my mouth to argue that running was not exactly a superpower, that humans jogged for exercise, that marathon runners existed, that some people back home ran up mountains for fun on weekends. But something in her expression told me this was not the moment for that argument. Not yet. "So what happens now?" I asked instead. "Now," she said, "the complaint proceeds through standard review. Given the unusual nature of the claim, and given that this is the first documented instance of extreme physical performance from a human crew member under recorded observation, the review board has requested a full physiological evaluation before any formal ruling is made." "A physiological evaluation," I repeated. "Medical bay, tomorrow morning, 0600 station time. Dr. Erie Soul will conduct the assessment personally." I almost laughed, but stopped myself when I saw that she was completely serious. "You want me to go get examined, because I ran down a hallway." "I want," she said, choosing her words with the precision of someone who had clearly had this exact argument with herself already, "to close this complaint cleanly, with data, so that it does not become the first of many. Because I suspect, Officer Cole, that this will not be the last time a human does something a Doran, an Ithran, or a Sonari believes should be impossible, and I would rather understand why now, calmly, in a controlled setting, than have this same conversation later under worse circumstances." There was something in the way she said worse circumstances that stuck with me longer than anything else in that meeting. I left her office more confused than when I had entered it. In the corridor outside, I found Olivia Grant waiting for me, arms crossed, a barely contained grin tugging at the corner of her mouth. "So," she said, "how's the trial going?" "It's not a trial," I said. "It's a review. Apparently, I'm being investigated for running too well." Her grin broke into a full laugh, quickly muffled behind her hand when a passing Sonari crew member glanced over. "Ethan, I am begging you to understand how this looks from the outside. You did a 5G sprint like it was a light morning jog, and then you walked into medical bay afterward without so much as a limp. Velen Thax has been telling everyone on this deck that you might not be fully human." "I am extremely human," I said. "I am, in fact, the most tired human currently on this station, because apparently running through crushing gravity has consequences, And those consequences are called sore legs. Try telling him that." I did. He looked at me like I'd grown a second head. We walked together toward the mess hall, and along the way I noticed something I had not paid attention to before. Crew members from other species, ones I had passed 100 times without a second glance, were now watching me differently. A pair of Doran engineers stopped their conversation entirely as I walked by. A young Ithran cadet, wings folded tight against her back, actually took a half step away from the corridor wall to give me a wider path, as if I might suddenly break into another impossible sprint at any moment. It was, frankly, unsettling. "This is going to be a whole thing, isn't it?" I said. "Oh, it is already a whole thing," Olivia said. "I heard 2 shift supervisors arguing about whether human strength ratings in the station database need to be revised. One of them wants to lower your listed maximum exertion capacity because he thinks the current number underestimates you. The other wants to keep it exactly where it is because he refuses to believe the incident happened the way witnesses described it. There were at least 6 witnesses. Doesn't matter. He says 6 witnesses under extreme physical stress cannot be considered reliable." I rubbed my eyes. "I just wanted to fix a valve." "Welcome to being the first human anyone's ever really watched closely," Olivia said, more gently now. "They don't have a baseline for us yet, Ethan. Every single thing we do that looks ordinary to us is going straight into somebody's research file as an anomaly." That night, lying in my bunk, I thought back over the whole incident, trying to see it the way Velen Thax must have seen it. To him, 5 times gravity was not an inconvenience. It was closer to being buried alive standing up, every organ straining under a weight his body had never been built to survive for more than a few seconds. He had gone down almost instantly, and from where he lay, helpless and pinned, he had watched another crew member simply keep moving, breathing hard but steady, muscles working exactly the way they were designed to underload. From his side of things, that was not heroism. That was proof that something he thought he understood about the universe, about biology, about limits, was wrong. I fell asleep still turning the thought over, and I woke up the next morning to a message waiting on my terminal, time-stamped just after midnight station time, sent from an address I did not recognize. The subject line read, "Additional witness statement submitted." I opened it, expecting more of the same. Instead, I found something stranger. A second crew member, a Sonari data analyst named Ithra Sell, had filed a supporting statement, not against me, but in support of Velen Thax's original complaint. She had reviewed the security footage from Deck 7 and included, attached to her statement, a detailed breakdown of my heart rate, stride length, and estimated muscular output during the sprint, all pulled from station sensors I did not even know were tracking that kind of data. Her conclusion, written in dry clinical language, was the part that stayed with me the longest. Subject displayed sustained output at levels consistent with catastrophic muscular failure risk for known partner species. Subject displayed no visible signs of distress. Recommend full evaluation prior to further duty assignment. This behavior pattern, if representative of baseline human physiology, requires reclassification across multiple existing threat and capability assessments currently held by Allied Fleet Command. I read that last line 3 times. Threat and capability assessments. I closed the message, got dressed, and made my way toward medical bay for 0600, no longer entirely sure whether I was walking into a simple checkup or the opening of something much larger, something that had less to do with one gravity malfunction and a lot more to do with what an entire alliance of species was quietly beginning to understand, or fail to understand, about what a human being actually was. Dr. Erie Soul was waiting for me at the entrance to the medical bay, and the moment she looked up from her console and saw me walking in under my own power, perfectly calm, she set down her instrument and simply stared, the way a person stares at a puzzle they have been dreading and looking forward to in equal measure. "Officer Cole," she said, "we have a great deal of testing to do today. I hope you slept well, because I do not think either of us is leaving this room until I understand exactly what your species is." The medical bay was colder than I remembered, Or maybe I simply noticed it more because of how many instruments were arranged along the far wall, each one clearly prepared the night before, each one waiting for me specifically. Dr. Eerie Soul moved with brisk efficiency, guiding me toward a raised table in the center of the room. She was Sinari, like Doran Kess, with the same faint silver sheen to her skin, though hers had a slight bluish tint near her temples that I would later learn indicated advanced age within her species. "Sit," she said, not unkindly. "We will begin with baseline readings, then move to load testing, then, if your administrator's paperwork is to be believed, we will finish with a live repeat of the incident that started all of this." "You want me to run in 5G again?" "I want data," she said. "Witness accounts are useful, but they are not measurements. I intend to have measurements." For the first hour, the testing was almost boring. Heart rate, lung capacity, bone density scans, reflex timing, blood analysis that had her assistant, a quiet Ithran technician, murmuring numbers to himself and rechecking the same reading twice, as if he expected the machine to correct itself the second time. "Your resting heart rate is unusually low," Dr. Saul said, studying the readout. "Is it? I never really thought about it. For a being your size and mass, I would expect a resting rate closer to 90. Yours is sitting at 58. I used to run a lot, back on Earth, distance running, mostly, some hiking. My old doctor said something about it making the heart more efficient over time, so it doesn't have to work as hard." She looked up sharply. "You did this voluntarily, for enjoyment." "Sometimes for enjoyment, sometimes just because it felt good to move. Sometimes because I was training for a race." "A race," she repeated, as if the word itself required translation. "You would deliberately push your body to its limit, repeatedly, for entertainment." "I mean, when you say it like that, it sounds a little strange, but yeah, a lot of humans do that. Not everyone, but a lot of us." She made a note, her stylus moving quickly across her tablet, and I caught a glimpse of the words she wrote before she turned the screen away. "Voluntary repeated stress exposure. Cultural normalization of extreme exertion." The next test involved a resistance harness, a device that simulated increasing gravitational load without actually changing the room's gravity field. "Useful," Dr. Saul explained, because it let her monitor my vital signs in real time without risking another full station malfunction. "We will begin at 2 times standard load," she said, tightening straps across my shoulders and waist. "If your readings remain stable, we increase. If your readings show distress, we stop immediately, regardless of what you say you are able to tolerate." "Understood." At 2 times gravity, I felt the familiar heaviness settle over my limbs, similar to carrying a fully loaded backpack on a long trail hike. My breathing deepened slightly, but nothing alarming. "Vitals stable," her assistant reported, increasing to 3. At 3 times gravity, my muscles began working harder, my breathing grew audibly heavier, and sweat started forming along my hairline. Still manageable. Still, if I was honest with myself, closer to a hard workout than an emergency. Increasing to 4. 4 times gravity brought real strain. My shoulders ached under the harness straps, my thighs burned holding my own weight upright, and each breath took visible effort. But my heart rate, according to the monitor beside me, climbed to a level that Dr. Saul studied with an expression somewhere between fascination and disbelief. "This is remarkable," she murmured, mostly to herself. "Your cardiovascular strain indicators are elevated, yes, clearly elevated, but they remain well within a range your species appears able to sustain for extended periods. A Sinari body at this load would already be approaching organ failure risk within minutes. How long before you're worried about me?" "I am not certain yet," she admitted. "That is rather the point of this exercise." "Increasing to 5, her assistant said. At 5 times gravity, the world narrowed the same way it had in the corridor 2 days earlier. My chest felt like it was being pressed by a great weight. My legs trembled slightly with the effort of simply standing upright, and sweat now ran freely down my face and neck. This was hard. This was, without question, the edge of what my body could comfortably do. But I did not go down. I did not black out. I stood, breathing hard, sweat dripping onto the floor beneath me, and looked directly at Dr. Soul. "Still here," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. She stared at the monitor for a long moment, then reached over and released the harness controls, easing the simulated load back down slowly rather than all at once. "That," she said quietly, once the gravity returned to standard and I had caught my breath, "is enough for today's stress testing. Your body clearly has more capacity remaining, but I would like to preserve some dignity for myself as a scientist by not personally being responsible for whatever happens if we push further without proper long-term monitoring in place." I managed a tired laugh. "So what does this mean? Am I some kind of anomaly?" She considered the question seriously, setting her tablet down and looking at me the way a person looks at something they respect and fear in equal measure. "Officer Cole, every species we have encountered across this alliance has known limits. We understand almost exactly how much strain a Doran body can endure, how quickly an Ithran will lose consciousness under high load, how a Sonari heart will fail if pushed too far for too long. These numbers are not guesses. They come from centuries of careful, sometimes painful research. And humans don't fit those numbers. Humans," she said, "appear to have built an entire physiology around the assumption that hardship is normal. Your bodies do not simply tolerate extreme exertion. In some ways, they seem designed to expect it, to prepare for it, to recover from it faster than any species I have direct data on. I do not yet understand why. I suspect the answer lies somewhere in your evolutionary history, and I intend to request full access to your species' biological records to study it properly." "We chased animals," I said, "a long time ago, before we had better tools. Some human hunters used to run their prey down over long distances, sometimes for hours, until the animal simply couldn't run anymore and we could finish the hunt on foot. Most other predators back home rely on short bursts of speed. We relied on being able to keep going longer than anything else." Dr. Saul was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. "You hunted by simply refusing to stop. Pretty much. That is either the most impressive or the most unsettling thing I have heard all cycle, and I genuinely cannot decide which." The final part of the evaluation, as promised, involved returning to an actual gravity chamber, a small isolated room built specifically for controlled environmental testing, where the deck's real gravity field could be adjusted directly rather than simulated through a harness. 5 times standard, Dr. Saul instructed her assistant, once I had stepped inside and the heavy door sealed behind me. "Full field, sustained for 90 seconds. Officer Cole, please walk the length of the chamber. Then, if you are willing, attempt a light jog on the return path. I want direct comparison data to the corridor incident." Through the observation window, I could see her assistant's hands hovering nervously over the emergency shutoff controls. The field engaged, and the familiar crushing weight settled over me all at once. I walked the length of the small chamber, each step deliberate, sweat already beading along my collar. At the far wall, I turned, took a slow breath, and pushed into a jog for the return trip, matching roughly the pace I had used in the corridor 2 days earlier. Through the thick observation glass, I could see Dr. Soul leaning forward, completely still, watching every motion of my legs, my arms, my breathing, with the intense focus of someone witnessing something she had genuinely never expected to see, confirmed with her own eyes. When the field released and I stepped out, breathing hard but steady, she did not immediately speak. She simply looked at her monitor, then at me, then back at the monitor, as if needing a third confirmation before she trusted what she was seeing. "It was not exaggerated," she finally said, quietly. "The reports, they were not exaggerated at all." "Told you," I managed, still catching my breath. "I owe Velenthax an apology," she said. "I assumed, privately, that his account had been distorted by fear, by the trauma of the incident itself. I now understand that he described exactly what happened, with complete accuracy, and that the true events were simply beyond what any of us were prepared to believe. Over the following 2 days, word of the evaluation results spread quietly through the science and engineering decks before reaching the wider crew. I was not part of those conversations directly, but Olivia kept me updated, usually over meals, usually with the same slightly disbelieving expression she'd worn since the whole thing started. "They've stopped calling it the running incident," she told me one evening. "Now people are calling it the Cole baseline." The what? Apparently Dr. Saul's report is being used to reset the entire assumed physical capability range for humans, across every allied species database. You're not an exception anymore, Ethan. You're the new normal. Every human who ever gets assigned to a station or a ship from now on is going to get measured against what you did in that gravity chamber. I sat with that for a long moment, turning my cup slowly on the table between us. That feels like a lot of pressure for something I did, because I didn't want to be late to my shift. "Welcome to being first," Olivia said. "Someone always has to be first. This time it happened to be you." I did not yet understand how far that first moment would travel, how many other species, on how many other stations, would soon be hearing the story of the human who ran through 5 times gravity and treated it like an inconvenience. I did not know that the story would keep changing shape as it spread, gaining details that had never actually happened, losing details that had. I only knew that when I returned to my quarters that night, genuinely exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with gravity fields or resistance harnesses, I found a single new message waiting on my terminal, sent from an address belonging to a ship I did not recognize, requesting official confirmation of the incident for what it called, simply, cross-fleet awareness purposes. It was the first message of many. Within a single station cycle, the message from the unfamiliar ship became a dozen messages, and within a week, those dozen became something closer to a flood. I stopped recognizing half the addresses reaching out to me directly, and Administrator Fen Ada eventually asked that all inquiries be routed through her office instead, simply so I could still get through a normal shift without my terminal chiming every few minutes. The story, as Olivia had warned me, did not stay accurate for long. By the time it reached a supply convoy 3 systems away, I had apparently run through gravity 10 times standard, not 5. By the time it reached a research outpost near the edge of Allied space, I had supposedly carried an unconscious crew member the entire distance while running. One particularly creative version, which reached us through a passing trade vessel, claimed I had done it while the corridor was on fire, which had never happened, and which I found myself having to deny more than once with a straight face. "It is remarkable," Dr. Saul told me one afternoon, reviewing yet another incoming inquiry on her tablet, "how quickly a true event becomes a legend once enough people repeat it without checking the original data. Can't you just send them your actual report?" "I have sent the actual report to 11 separate requesting parties," she said. 9 of them wrote back asking if the report itself had been altered to downplay what truly happened, because the real numbers, apparently, did not sound impressive enough compared to the version they had already heard. That, more than anything, told me how strange this had all become. The truth was already remarkable. It did not need embellishment, and yet it kept getting embellished anyway, because a species that had just discovered its assumptions about biology might be badly wrong, seemed almost desperate to make the discovery even bigger than it actually was. Not everyone found the story amusing. 10 days after the original incident, our station received a formal visit from a delegation aboard a sleek, dark-hulled vessel bearing the insignia of the Cordath Compact, a smaller alliance of species I knew mostly by reputation, cautious, insular, and famously slow to trust outsiders of any kind. Their delegation leader, a tall, angular being named Kadrin Voss, requested a direct meeting with station leadership, and, to my discomfort, specifically with me. I met him in a conference room just off the administrative deck, Administrator Fen Ada seated beside me, her posture carefully neutral in the way of someone who had learned to read a room long before the room had finished forming its opinion. Kadrin Voss did not waste time on pleasantries. "I have read Dr. Soul's evaluation," he said, his voice low and measured. I have also read 17 unofficial accounts of the same incident circulating through independent trade channels, each one different from the last. I am here to determine which version, if any, reflects reality, because the implications matter a great deal to my people. The doctor's report is accurate, I said. I ran through 5 times gravity to reach a control node and manually closed a failed valve. That's the whole story. There was no fire, no rescue, nothing dramatic beyond exactly that. That is dramatic enough, he said flatly. Do you understand what a capability like that means, strategically, if it is representative of your species as a whole, and not simply an unusual individual? Administrator Fen Ada leaned forward slightly. Ambassador Voss, I would caution against reading too much into a single incident. I would caution against dismissing it, he replied, without looking at her. My people have spent generations building careful agreements with every species in this region, agreements based on known strengths, known weaknesses, known limits. Humanity has been part of this alliance for barely 2 years, and already we are discovering that the numbers we were given at the start of that arrangement may be significantly understated. I felt the weight of that statement settle over the room in a way that had nothing to do with actual gravity. With respect, I said carefully, I'm not a soldier, I'm a logistics officer. I fixed a valve because people were in danger and I happened to be able to reach it. I'm not trying to prove anything about what humans can or can't do in a fight. Kadrin Voss studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. That may be true for you, individually, but my concern, Officer Cole, is not about your intentions. It is about capability. A species that can move and function under conditions that would incapacitate every other member of this alliance is not merely useful. It is, depending entirely on how that capability is directed, either an extraordinary asset or a considerable risk. My government would like to understand which, before humanity's role within this alliance grows any further. Administrator Fen Ada's voice remained calm, but I caught the faint edge beneath it. Ambassador, humanity has done nothing during its time in this alliance except assist, cooperate, and, in this specific instance, respond to an emergency that endangered the lives of crew from 3 separate allied species. If anything, this incident demonstrates the value of having humans present on stations like this one. Perhaps, Kadrin Voss said, or perhaps it demonstrates how little any of us truly understand about the species we have welcomed among us. I do not say this to insult your officer. I say this because caution, in matters like this, has kept my people safe for a very long time, and I do not intend to abandon that caution simply because the individual in question seems, by all accounts, personally reasonable. He left not long after, promising only that his government would be filing its own formal inquiry, separate from the original complaint, requesting broader access to human physiological data across the entire alliance. I sat in that conference room after he departed, staring at the closed door, feeling something I had not expected to feel through any of this. Not embarrassment, not annoyance, but a low, quiet unease, the sense that a small, personal moment, a single decision to keep running when everyone else around me had gone down, had somehow grown into something with weight far beyond my own shoulders. He's not wrong to be cautious, I admitted eventually. No, Fen Ada agreed. He is not. But caution can curdle into fear if it is not handled carefully, and fear, in my experience, tends to make bad decisions feel reasonable to the people making them. The delegation's visit did not stay quiet for long. Within days, the wider crew was openly discussing what it might mean for humanity's standing within the Alliance, and I found myself, uncomfortably, at the center of conversations I had never asked to be part of. Some crew members leaned into open curiosity. A group of young Doran engineers began quietly asking me questions during meal breaks, wanting to know what else humans could apparently endure, whether all of us could run like that, whether our children grew up training for it the way soldiers trained for combat. I did my best to explain, patiently, that most humans were not endurance athletes, that plenty of us struggled to run even a short distance without stopping, that what I had done was simply within the higher end of normal human capability rather than some hidden ability unlocked by crisis. They did not fully believe me, but they listened, and that felt like enough progress for one conversation. Others were less generous. I overheard, more than once, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when I walked past. Conversations that I suspected involved words like risk assessment and containment protocols. Phrases that made the unease in my chest settle in a little deeper each time. Olivia noticed the shift in mood before I fully admitted it to myself. "You've gone quiet," she said one evening, sliding into the seat across from me in the mess hall. "Just thinking. About the Cordath ambassador." "About all of it," I admitted. "I keep thinking that if I hadn't run that day, if I'd just stayed put and waited for someone else to reach the valve, none of this would be happening. No complaint, no evaluation, no delegation asking whether humans are secretly dangerous." "And how many people would have been hurt if you'd waited?" Olivia asked quietly. I didn't answer right away, because I already knew the answer. The regulator had been drawing power instead of releasing it. Left unchecked for even a few more minutes, the feed line would likely have failed entirely, and a full structural failure on that deck, under 5 times standard gravity, would have meant far more than bruised pride and a complaint form. "A lot of people," I admitted. "Then you did the right thing," she said simply. "The rest of it, the complaints, the delegations, the arguments about what it all means, that's not on you to fix. That's what Fen Ada and people above her get paid to handle. Your job was to reach that valve. You did your job." It was a kind thing to say, and I appreciated it. But I noticed she did not promise that the rest of it would go away quietly. I think by then, we both suspected it would not. 2 weeks after the original incident, the station received word that the review board's decision on the original complaint was finally ready, and that a formal hearing would be held to close the matter once and for all, with representatives present not only from our own crew, but from the Cordath Compact delegation as well. I walked into that hearing already knowing the physical facts were not in question. Dr. Soul's data was thorough, verified, and consistent with every witness account. What remained uncertain was not what had happened. What remained uncertain was what the Alliance intended to do about it. The hearing chamber was larger than I expected, a circular room with tiered seating that curved around a central floor, built for exactly this kind of formal proceeding. Administrator Fen Ada sat at the head table alongside 2 review board members I had never met, both Scenari, both wearing the kind of composed expression that gave away nothing. Kadrin Voss sat with his own small delegation along the left side of the room, arms folded, watching everything with the same careful, measuring gaze he had used in our first meeting. Velen Thax sat near the front, wings tucked tightly against his back, looking smaller and more nervous than I remembered him. Dr. Soul was called first, and she walked the room through her findings with the same clinical precision she had used throughout the entire evaluation, presenting heart rate data, muscular output figures, and comparative charts showing human tolerance ranges next to Doran, Ithran, and Scenari baselines. The numbers, laid out plainly on the display screen, were stark enough that even without her commentary, several members of the review board leaned forward, studying the gap between the human curve and every other line on the chart. "The data is not in dispute," she said, finishing her summary. "Officer Cole's actions on Deck 7 were extraordinary by the standards of every species represented in this alliance, myself included. However, they appear entirely ordinary by the standards of his own species. I do not believe this was an act of desperation or adrenaline beyond his normal limits. I believe this is simply what a healthy human body is capable of." Velen Thax was called next, and he spoke haltingly at first, clearly uncomfortable being at the center of so much attention. "I do not regret filing the complaint," he said eventually, his voice steadier than I expected. "I still believe what I witnessed needed to be understood properly, not ignored. But I want to be clear that my complaint was never about anger toward Officer Cole. It was about fear of the unknown. I did not know, that day, whether what I was seeing was safe, or controlled, or something that could turn dangerous without warning. I filed the complaint because I believed the Alliance deserved to understand what had happened, not because I believed Officer Cole had done anything wrong. He looked at me directly then, something I hadn't expected. I want to say, formally, that I am grateful the valve was closed in time. I did not say that clearly enough before now. I nodded to him, and something in my chest eased slightly, a tension I hadn't fully realized I was carrying until it started to let go. Kadron Voss rose when it was his turn, and the room noticeably stilled. "I do not dispute the data," he said. "I do not dispute that Officer Cole's actions prevented a more serious outcome. My concern remains what it was during our first conversation. A species capable of this level of physical performance requires careful, ongoing understanding, not simply a single evaluation and a closed file. I would ask this board to consider establishing permanent standing protocols for monitoring human physical capability across the Alliance, not as an accusation but as prudent." The chamber's lighting flickered. It was a small thing at first, barely noticeable, the kind of flicker you might dismiss as nothing at all. Then the lighting dropped fully for 2 full seconds before stuttering back to half strength, and a low tone began pulsing through the room's speakers, a tone I had heard only once before, during a safety briefing months earlier, the tone reserved for hull integrity failure. Administrator Fen Ada was on her feet instantly. "Report." A voice crackled through the chamber's comm system, tight with barely controlled urgency. "Docking collar 3 has lost structural seal. The Kordath vessel's mooring clamp is failing under stress. We have a partial hull breach forming at the connection point. Emergency bulkheads are engaging, but the pressure differential is pulling debris and loose equipment toward the breach. We have crew trapped in the connecting corridor, unable to reach the emergency shelter doors before they seal." The room erupted into motion, review board members rising, aides rushing toward exits, Kadron Voss's own security escort moving instinctively toward the door, despite having no idea yet what they could actually do. "How many crew?" Fen Ada demanded. 4 confirmed, 2 Doran maintenance workers, 1 Ithran systems tech, and 1 member of the Kordath delegation who was touring the docking section. The corridor gravity has spiked as a side effect of the seal failure, consistent with pressure compensation systems overcorrecting. Current reading is estimated at 4 to 5 times standard and climbing. No one currently in that corridor can move fast enough to reach the shelter doors before automatic sealing triggers in 90 seconds. 90 seconds. I did not remember deciding to move. I simply found myself already at the chamber door, pushing past a startled review board aide, Dr. Saul's voice calling something after me that I didn't catch, my legs already carrying me into a full sprint down the corridor, toward the lift that led to the docking section. The lift, thankfully, was still running. I punched the docking deck level and felt my stomach drop as it descended faster than I think it was technically supposed to, my mind running through the layout of that section from memory, trying to picture exactly where the connecting corridor sat relative to the lift doors. The doors opened onto chaos. Alarms blared along the docking deck, amber emergency lighting washing the corridor in a dim, urgent glow, and through the reinforced viewport ahead, I could already see the telltale shimmer of a partial atmospheric containment field straining to hold against a breach it was not built to handle for long. I hit the corridor at a dead run, and the gravity spike caught me exactly the way it had on deck 7 weeks earlier, my body suddenly heavier, my strides shortening under the crushing weight. But this time, I knew exactly what my legs could still do, and I did not slow down. Ahead, through the haze of loose debris being pulled toward the failing seal, I could see them, 2 Doran workers down against the corridor wall, one struggling weakly to rise and failing, an Ithran technician curled low, wings pinned beneath her, one arm stretched toward the emergency shelter door that was still, agonizingly, 3 meters beyond her reach, and past all of them, closer to the breach itself, a Kordath delegate, unfamiliar with human station layouts and clearly disoriented, pressed against the wrong section of wall entirely, directly in the path of debris being pulled toward the failing collar. The shelter door's countdown display read 11 seconds. I reached the Ithran technician first, hooking one arm under her shoulders and hauling her upright with a strength that even I registered, distantly, as harder than it should have been to summon. I half-carried, half-dragged her the remaining distance and shoved her through the shelter door as it began its final closing sequence, then turned back toward the two Doran workers. 7 seconds. There was no time to carry both. I grabbed the nearer one, the one who had been struggling to rise, and threw his arm over my shoulders, forcing us both forward under a weight that made every joint in my body scream in protest. The second Doran worker, seeing there was no way I could reach him too in time, did something I will never forget. He pushed himself upright with a final, desperate effort, using the wall for leverage, and staggered the last few steps toward the door under his own power, collapsing through it just as I shoved the first worker in behind him. 3 seconds. The Kordath delegate was still against the wrong wall, frozen, watching debris rattle past, dangerously close to the failing seal. I did not have time to think about strategy. I simply turned, crossed the remaining distance in 2 heavy, gravity-crushed strides, grabbed the delegate by the arm, and threw both of us bodily through the shelter door as it began its final seal. The door closed a half-second after we cleared it, sealing with a heavy mechanical thud that vibrated through the floor. For a moment, nobody in that small shelter room said anything at all. Then the Doran worker who had forced himself upright at the last second let out a long, shaking breath, and the Ithran technician began, quietly, to cry with relief rather than pain. The Kordath delegate simply stared at me, chest heaving, clearly trying to process what had just happened. "You came back for me," he said finally, his voice unsteady. "Wasn't going to leave anyone in that corridor," I said, still catching my own breath, my legs trembling from the strain of the past 30 seconds. "That's not how this works." It took engineering crews another 20 minutes to stabilize the docking collar and restore normal pressure and gravity to the corridor. By the time the shelter door finally reopened, Administrator Fen Ada was waiting on the other side, along with Dr. Saul, Kadrin Voss, and a small crowd of crew members who had gathered once word spread of what had happened. Kadrin Voss looked at me for a long moment as I stepped out of the shelter, still breathing hard, sweat soaked through my uniform for the second time in a matter of weeks. "That delegate," he said quietly, "was a member of my own staff." "I know," I said. "That's why I went back for him." He did not say anything else immediately. He simply looked at me, then at the sealed shelter door, then back at me, and something in his expression had shifted from the careful, measuring caution I'd seen throughout our previous meetings into something closer to quiet reassessment. The hearing reconvened 2 days later, once the docking collar had been fully repaired and the involved crew members had been cleared by medical staff. The mood in the chamber was noticeably different from before. Velen Thax sat closer to the front this time, watching with open curiosity rather than nervous distance. The Doran worker who had forced himself upright at the last second gave a brief statement thanking the review board for allowing him the chance to speak, and made a point of specifically thanking me by name before returning to his seat. Kadrin Voss rose to give his closing statement, and the room quieted in a way that felt different from the tension of 2 days earlier. "I came to this station prepared to argue for caution," he said. "I still believe caution has value. But I did not expect that caution to be answered so directly, so quickly, in a moment where caution was not what was needed at all." Officer Cole did not hesitate to return for a member of my own delegation, a species he owes no particular loyalty to, in a corridor that could have easily cost him his own life alongside everyone else's. "I withdraw my request for standing surveillance protocols on human physical capability. I will instead be recommending to my own government that humanity's capabilities, whatever their full extent may be treated as a resource this alliance is fortunate to have, rather than a risk it must be guarded against." The review board's final ruling, delivered shortly after, closed the original complaint entirely, noting formally that Officer Ethan Cole's actions on Deck 7, and subsequently during the docking collar emergency, demonstrated behavior consistent with, and I remember this phrasing distinctly because Olivia would not stop repeating it to me for weeks afterward, exceptional service beyond reasonably expected physical limits for any known species, human or otherwise. Buried within the same ruling, almost as an afterthought, was a new station-wide advisory. The first of what I would later learn became an entire growing category of footnotes attached to human crew assignments across the Alliance. It stated, simply, that human personnel were not to be assumed incapacitated under environmental stress conditions that would disable other species, and that emergency protocols involving human crew should account for significantly higher tolerance thresholds than previously documented. Administrator Fen Ada found me afterward in the corridor outside the chamber, and for the first time since I had met her, she allowed herself something close to a genuine smile. "You do understand," she said, "that you have single-handedly created more paperwork for this alliance than any other individual crew member in the station's history." "Sorry about that. Do not apologize," she said. "I suspect this will not be the last time humanity forces this alliance to rewrite its assumptions. I only hope, Officer Cole, that the next time it happens, it comes with slightly less immediate danger attached." Word of the docking collar incident spread even faster than the original story, and this time, strangely, the exaggeration seemed to matter less. The truth itself had become dramatic enough to stand on its own. Crew members across the station, and eventually across the wider alliance, stopped asking whether the story was really true, and started asking instead what else humans might be quietly capable of that nobody had thought to test yet. I did not have an answer for that. I still do not, fully. I only know that somewhere out there, on some other station, some other human is probably doing something completely ordinary by our standards, lifting something too heavy, running somewhere too far, staying calm through something that would break another species entirely, and somewhere nearby, some alien crew member is almost certainly staring in complete disbelief, already reaching for a terminal to file a report about it. I imagine, wherever that happens, it will not be the last complaint humanity ever receives for simply being exactly what we are.